Termo to Madeline. Introduction. The Madeline Plains is a large and flat mountain plateau, surrounded on all sides by ancient volcanic mountains, which rise anywhere from 1 to 3,000 feet above the valley floor. The floor of the plains, or the flat, as it's commonly called, is 5,300 feet above sea level. This flat contains approximately 100,000 acres and is in the shape of a huge L. The first work by the author on Madeline Plains history, Red Rock to Ravendale, covers the eastern side of the plains, or the foot of the L. Termo to Madeline is a history of the leg of the L, or the western half of the Madeline Plains. It is not that there is any real geographic division between the two sides, or that there was not overlapping of people and events between the two, but, for lack of printing space, this history has been broken down into two sections. Both cover a period from 1868 to 1935. What happened before 1868 on the Madeline Plains is anybody's guess. Other than a government survey taken in 1864, and a few parties of immigrants, land and route prospectors, and Indian fighters passing through, there was no activity by white men prior to that year. If any work was done by human hands in the area prior to the 1860s, it was done by Indian hands. And after 1935, printing space again enters into the picture. All activities after that date have, by necessity, been reserved for another volume. So now, in order to obtain an understanding of the country we are talking about, if the reader will take a firm hold on the reins, pull his hat down tight, and sit deep in his saddle, we will spur our horses into a long gallop, because, you see, we have about 70 miles to cover just in order to make a circle around the area that is covered in this book. Termo. This would be a good starting place, since most everybody, young or old, has been there and visited with the mayor, owner, gas station attendant, general store clerk, postmaster, weatherman, real estate agent, and general authority on everything concerning Termo. Lasco. From there, we will go about 3 miles in a southwesterly direction across the flat to the foothills of the west side. Here we're at Mud Springs, or what is more recently known as the Ducasse place, named for the Pierre Ducasse family. One of the first early-day wagon roads into the plains came through here. It was built by Benjamin E. Shumway of Horse Lake in 1869 and connected Willow Creek Valley, Horse Lake Valley, and the Madeline Plains. From Mud Springs we'll continue in a southwest direction approximately 7 miles to the Bailey Creek Reservoir. Although the spelling of Bailey Creek is generally rendered Bailey, it will be spelled Bailey throughout this work, since that is the way the man whom it is named, George H. Bailey, and that's the way he spelled his name. Actually, back in the very early days before George Bailey came on the scene, and many years afterwards, it was known as Madeline Creek. So the reader may know that Madeline Creek and Bailey Creek is the same place. Next we'll turn north 3 miles to Dry Valley Gap, where Dry Valley meets the Madeline Plains in a very narrow pass. There will be some overlapping at this narrow connection, since the people who lived close on both sides of the line generally operated on both places. Now from there, we'll travel 9 miles up the rocky and rugged Dry Valley Ridge to 7,072-foot high Whittaker Mountain. This mountain is named for Sam Whittaker and the Sam Whittaker family, one of the early pioneer families of the area. Now, 3 miles below and southeast of this peak is a ridge jutting out into a flat called 9 Mile Point. It's an excellent reference point just 9 miles northwest of the town of Termo and 9 miles southwest of the town of Madeline. Continuing northward from Whittaker Mountain, we cover another 4 miles to what is known today as Spooner Reservoir. This is where the original Spooner place was. It is named for one of its original owners, Michael E. Spooner. He was a large rancher who came to Ash Valley in 1884 from Carson City, Nevada. And over the years, as he continued to add more land to his holdings, this piece of ground in a small valley in the mountains between Ash Valley and the Madeline Plains made an excellent summer range for him. Now just in back of the Spooner place is Anderson Mountain. It is named for the Albert J. Anderson family. Mr. Anderson was another of the early pioneers on the plains. In fact, he sold out and left in 1898. Leaving Spooner Reservoir, we'll turn northeast and cover another 10 miles to Smith Reservoir on the north end of Sage Hen Flat. As we travel along, Ash Valley lies below us to the left, and below us on the right is the old Williams Ranch, today called Moon Valley Ranch, but originally known as the Marsh Place. There's a group of springs and a creek on this extreme northwest corner of the Madeline Plains that was originally called Marsh Creek, and the entire area was, and still is, very marshy due to the springs and an abundance of water. As we continue onward toward Smith Reservoir, we come to what is today called Nelson Corrals, so called in honor of William H. Nelson, or Willie Nelson, a prominent likely rancher of the early days. The entire area was originally called Harder's Flat in honor of J.P. Harder, another early-day likely rancher. And likely, by the way, did not exist in those early days. That valley, which now lies below us, was called South Fork Valley, or just plain South Fork because of the South Fork of the Pitt River which flows through it. Now at Smith Reservoir, we will discontinue our northerly travels and stop for a breather to get our bearings. Smith Reservoir is named for John Alexander Smith, one of the very early pioneers to the extreme north end of the plains, and one of the local freighters or jerk-line skinners. If one looks just below the old Smith place, to the north, he can see Dry Creek Canyon, where the Bureau of Land Management has a fire station today. On below is the South Fork Valley. Looking back to the south is Sage Hen Flat, and the author will assume the reader's general ability to determine what that is named for. On a little farther is the town of Madeline, and another Bailey Reservoir, also named for George H. Bailey, and his nephew Wilson Bailey. If we leave Smith Reservoir and travel west to the summit of 7,098-foot-high Tule Mountain, we will again need a breather to get our bearings straight on some of the subject matter which the reader will encounter. Just below us, 4 miles to the northeast, is Warm Springs. Here was a favorite camping place of the Pitt River Indians in the early days. And since the Pitt River Indians will have their place in the early history of the Madeline Plains, we will digress just a moment to get them straight in our minds. There were several Pit River tribes living peacefully in this same general area where the white man came. They all belonged to a group of Indians known as the Echamawi. They were in no way related or in peaceful terms with their neighbors to the north, the Modocs. They were, however, related to the Shasta, Hat Creek, and Washoe tribes, and spoke the same general language of the Hokan family. Once the white man moved into the South Fork Valley, these Pit River Indians generally accepted him quickly and soon adopted his ways, many of them working for the early ranchers. There generally was a large valley of Pit River Indians at Warm Springs, and they were sometimes called Warm Springs Indians. The general area was also called Warm Springs. In fact, getting back to where we have stopped on our journey around the west side of the Madeline Plains, Tule Mountain also was originally called Warm Springs Mountain. Just below us is the cause of the name being changed to Tule Mountain. Tule Lake Reservoir. Back in the early days, before land and water promoters came onto the scene and dammed and diverted Cedar Creek, there was a swampy valley of about 3,000 acres there. It was known as Tule Lake or Tule Marsh. Actually, back in those days, along about 1870 to 1890, this whole area we are traveling around to the west side of the Madeline Plains was referred to as Tule Lake. Everybody who lived anywhere in it lived at Tule Lake. There were no towns at this time on the Madeline Plains, just two general areas. Those living anywhere on the west half of the plains lived at Tule Lake, and those lived on the east side half lived at Red Rock. Madeline, as we know it today, did not come into being until the turn of the century. The original Madeline was a stage station on the south end of Grasshopper Valley, or Grasshopper Lake as it was then known. It was established as a post office on September 25th, 1875. So actually, the early ranchers in Grasshopper Valley were the first residents of Madeline. Anyway, we've rested long enough if we're going to finish our 70-mile circle today. If we continue on westward from Tule or Warm Springs Mountain until we reach a point 8 miles from Smith Reservoir, we can look down into the steep and treacherous deep canyon. Unless you have brought your climbing rope, a grappling hook, and carabiners, you will probably not care to go down into Deep Canyon. But you can look down, if you're not afraid of heights, at the former home of the famous, or infamous, depending on your point of view, John L. Nelson, son of Willie and Katie Nelson of South Fork. At Deep Canyon, we turn back south and head across some of the most beautiful country of the area. We cross Cedar Creek at a point halfway between Tule Lake and Clark's Valley. Here there's a nice strip of meadow land known as Smith Flat. This is also named for John Alexander Smith and family. We continue on across past Mindaboro Reservoir, Polson Springs, and Laxalt and Etchkabar homesteads. This is high country, generally around 7,000 feet in elevation, grassy and meadow-like in the valley and covered with heavy mahogany growth on the ridges. About 4 miles to the southwest of us is 7,931-foot-high McDonald Peak, the highest mountain on this side of the Madeline Plains. It is named for Daniel McDonald, who owned a place at its base, today known as the Mindaboro Ranch. McDonald was one of the first 3 men to take up places on the western Madeline Plains. As we continue onward around the east side of McDonald Peak, we eventually arrive at Maiden Valley. This is a beautiful mountain valley with an elevation of 6,000 feet. 5 miles below Maiden Valley, we can stop on Juniper Ridge and look back out across a cove to the northwest at McDonald Peak and the 7,000-foot-high Three Peaks. Now, back in the early days, this was called Kilby Cove. It was thus called because of James Kilby, the first settler into the area. And it was here, supposedly in this cove, that a little girl traveling with a group of immigrants died and was buried. She, so the legend goes, was named Madeline, pronounced Madeline. And so from here, it's only a short 5-mile trot back into Termo, where, if we're not too late, we can get something cold to drink at the Termo store and sit down and shoot the breeze with the entire town population of Sulo, Pete, and Ed.